It's Jeff Mayhew. It's John Beatty. It's Politics and Parenting, where we talk about politics, but we talk about it differently. John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Jeff. Just a little parenting thing where our son's doing middle school rugby, so we had a small tournament this afternoon, and I honestly didn't really know the rules of rugby before then, other than I knew you couldn't do a forward pass, and it was just fun watching him grow up. As Katie likes to say, he's our little baby, and he's not really little anymore or a baby, but it's fun to just sort of see your children grow and develop and get new skills and have new interests and things. And I mean, I think at this point last year, if you'd said is he going to be playing rugby? I don't think he would have even know what was going on. So it's just a joy. It's to watch your kids grow and put some purpose what we're doing here. Making sure there's a nation for them in the future. So, how was your week?
It was pretty good. The family's kind of been sick. Vanessa and I have been battling a bug and trying to work. And I spent 2 days in the classroom last week as a watchdog at Haymark Elementary for my girls. One day with Sadie and one day with Eleanor. And it's a lot. Man, those teachers do not get paid enough. It's insane. Like they have too many kids in the classroom, which I asked pretty much every teacher I came in contact with. I'm like, what do you think the number one problem the education system has? And they kind of like sat and they looked at me and they thought about it. And I go, let me just ask you a question. Do you think that if we lowered the amount of kids in the classroom and we built more schools, that would help the problem? And they were like, oh my God, yes, that's it. And I say this standing like 20 feet away from two trailers that the school has already because they can't fit the kids inside the school because every school in Northern Virginia is overcrowded. Um, but every every 5 seconds, it feels like in the classroom, their teacher is having to listen to three different kids at the same
Hmm.
time ask them questions. It's just and like the patience that the teachers have, like it is just it's impressive. I on my second day when I was leaving, I told Eleanor's teacher, I was like, I watched Miss Sadie's teacher yesterday and I watched you today, and I go, I'm just amazed because I'm annoyed and they're not bothering me. They're not asking me questions. So I can only imagine how you feel. And she just gave me one of those smiles and like, yep, it's just part of the job. But I mean, they do a fantastic job. It's impressive. It really is. And that's why I try to spend as much time in the classroom to help as possible because I know
Hmm.
they need it. Oh
Yeah,
man.
no, I mean, teachers do a lot. It's an important job, and I don't know if you could ever pay them enough.
Well, see, that's the thing is like everybody's talking about teacher pay and whatnot. And it's like, well, I think it's more of a quality of life thing. From the
Yeah,
teachers that I've talked to that have left the profession, it's not because, yes, it would be nice if they got paid more, but only because the job has become that difficult. If you made the job easier by hiring more teachers and building more schools and, setting a requirement for kids in the classroom, um, um, you know, I think that the quality of life goes up and you don't have to pay them as much anymore. Like teachers, I don't think people don't get into teaching for the money. Like
right.
it's not
No,
what
it's to
they're
help
looking
kids.
for. They're looking for money and now because their job has gotten so hard and they're just kind of miserable and they're like, if you don't pay me more, I'm leaving, because I could go make more outside of this. And it's just such a silly thing for us to do as a governing body everywhere, just like, well, let's just throw money at the problem. Let's just pay them more. Their job has gotten harder because we have not done a good enough job of keeping up with the growth of our population and the infrastructure that we need because schools are basically infrastructure,
Yeah.
and so let's just throw money at the problem. But if you actually sat down and you spoke with teachers, you'd be surprised. That's not the number one thing that they're focused on. They love teaching. They love, shaping kids and like helping them grow. It's just a passion. And,
Mhm.
you know, it's just a bad side effect that it's gotten as bad as it has.
Yeah, I mean, the quality of life is definitely part of that. So you had sent me this article, not to shift gears too much, but this article on modern founderism. So read it, And the gist I got was that we have to abandon the founding fathers because they're just not good enough for us anymore.
Yeah, so this was an article our friend Stephen Kent actually sent me on Friday, and it was making its rounds around Twitter. I saw like the political pundits kind of talking about it, and it's Forget the Founding Fathers by Michael Lind on Compact. And yeah, it is this gist of we shouldn't pay attention to our founding fathers. Now, I took away, I'm like, what I read from this is they just kind of want to be able to like build their own government and do their
Mm-hmm.
own things and not have to worry about the restraints of the principles, the ideas that our founding fathers had, the separation of powers, the checks and balances, the small government, the limited powers. I feel, what did you take away from it?
So I kind of got that sense of like it's an idea to sort of break things down, like we're in such a bad spot, and the reason we're in a bad spot is because we have these bad ideas, and so we should just get rid of those bad ideas. But to me, that's very much the quote critical theories, that term that gets bandied around, like where you're basically trying to critique something to death, where you say like, look, I can scientifically show that like this happened, then this happened, and this happened. So therefore, and we can prove, we can say like, well, the result here at this point was bad, so we should throw everything else away. And I think it's a total misreading of it. I think, I would say the British tradition. One of the key data points is that the British people have no tradition of like looking back on their founders, and I think that's total nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like the whole monarchy is its own sort of tradition. They've got the kings, like they look back on their founders, on people in charge, and they say like these are great people, or these are flawed people. We're going to learn from them, but we're not going to throw away our entire system. And you've seen that like it's evolved where the monarchy is now kind of more ceremonial in some senses, but it's a key part of the system where the king just kind of starts up parliament. So there's an aspect of like the British society where they have this foundation that they lean onto, and then it lets them experiment with other stuff. And I think so. I think like I would kind of disagree that like the British don't have people to look back onto. And then he kind of goes through other things, like he talks about Marxists and stuff, and like they have Marx, Lenin, Stalin, like people that they look up to. So I didn't quite get that, and sort of saying like, so are we communists because we have people we look back to? Like every society has people they look back to. Everyone has some kind of history that they go to, and like this is a key bit of this ancient story, the Aeneid, where the city of Troy is sacked by the Greeks, and the Trojans have nothing, and so Aeneas leaves Troy to go start a new place. But what does he carry with him? He carries his household gods. He carries his civilization with him, like what little remnants of like that he goes to start something. So I think it's just very inhumane to say like, oh, we can just wipe the slate clean and have nothing and start from scratch, where that would never be the case, because we're always building on top of something. I was explaining to my children, sorry, not the kind of children, my students in my programming class, like, every programming language you're learning, like you're building on what someone else did. And there's this phrase, I'm sure it's not just a programming phrase, but like standing on the shoulders of giants. And politics, civilization is like that. Like we only get to where we are today because we're standing on who came before us, flaws, warts and all. So yeah, I could imagine John Adams, and there's a quote in John Adams like, oh, this is going to be some civilization where society is sprung from the lightning bolt of Ben Franklin, and out pops George Washington.
I don't even think the John Adams quote. Let me find that, because I didn't even
he's
think that
he's
really.
curmudgeonly enough. I could imagine him saying that, but like I think,
But I didn't feel like it actually helped his argument. Like, I mean, I think you have to want it to be that argument to think it helps your argument. Like I don't feel like the context of that quote has anything to do with it.
That's a very like tongue-in-cheek thing he would say. I think it was more ironic of like, people are going to forget about me.
Right. But yes, and we know that John Adams probably was saying that every day. They were like, I'm a one-term president. They're not even going to remember me. I kept us out of war with France. Nobody cares.
Yeah, and then
I get no respect. I give no respect. That's John Adams to me. I get no respect.
And then there's a bit about like how Franklin or no Jefferson wanted this insignia to have two Teutonic heroes. I don't remember the names if you remember. It's like Haggis or something.
I don't know.
Um, and it failed. And it's like, oh well, see, he was just trying to push Teutonic heraldry or something. We're like, no, people realized it was silly, so they got rid of they didn't want it. I mean, like that's part of the whole process. Like you float an idea, you see if people agree with you, and if you don't get enough people to agree with you, you don't have the idea. Like that's democracy in a nutshell, if you will. But
Well,
like that's it's ridiculous to say like, well, because someone had a crazy idea that didn't get passed, we should throw everything away. Like I say actually an incentive to say like, actually it worked because it was a crazy idea, we didn't do it.
well, I mean, yeah. Well, so there's a quote at the end by John Jay, not John Jay, John Hay. I had this mistake earlier today. Um, and it, so I'll read the quote and then I'll talk about it. The past gives no clue to the future. The fathers, where they are, and the prophets, do they live forever? We are ourselves the fathers. We are ourselves the prophets. The questions that are put to us, we must answer without delay, without help, for the Sphinx allows no one to pass. And so, like, so just for context, who John Hay was, he was the private secretary of Abraham Lincoln, and he served in the McKinley assassination, or not in the assassination. He served in the McKinley administration. So to give context to this, and they kind of talk about a little bit in the articles, or in the article about how um, we started with this limited, or we had this limited government, and then we get to the they talk about the Lochner era, which really starts to expand corporate rights and this bigger, broader government. And Hay was kind of part of that in the whole Lincoln, after the Civil War. That's when the 14th Amendment was passed, which was used a lot during the Lochner era to expand the rights of corporations, or kind of like create this idea that corporations had rights. Um, and of course, they want us to forget the past, because
Mm-hmm.
in the past, at the beginning, there was no corporate rights. Right, like there was no such thing as a corporate right. There was this idea that corporations had speech, or any of that type of stuff had not even come across any legislation at all. And so, but I think I understand where Hayes coming from with this question, with what he says here, is like we ourselves are the fathers, we ourselves are the prophets, because he's part of the government, he's one of the
Mm-hmm.
ones that has to make the decisions, he's part of the inside crew, and you've got to be confident, you've got to know what to decide, but how do you come to those decisions is what's most important. And look at his boss, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln looked back to the Federalist Papers. Okay. He looked back to the Constitution to find his answers. He looked back to our founders. And it's how do you come to be prepared? If you want to be the father, you have to first be the son. Okay. And you can't learn from your father if you've forgotten him. If you've
Mm-hmm.
just abandoned the founding fathers, there's nothing to learn from. There's no foundation, and you're going to be very unprepared to make difficult decisions in the future, because look, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Power is power, and people fight and tug over it. And if you look back at how we handled things in the past, you'll be able to avoid bad decisions and maybe make better decisions in the future. So I don't know. I think it's a little ridiculous that we would just be like, hey, this whole thing that we love, America, and all those people that made it, let's forget about them. We don't really need them. What do we care what James Madison thinks about corporate rights? Well, I care. I care. And it's not like you don't have to, it's not like you have to find something that our founders talked about specific to an issue today, because the issues are a little bit different, but you can find something that they talked about that applies to the issue today, and like how they were thinking about it, and what did they learn, why were they important, because they looked back too. They looked at the Romans, they looked at the Greeks, they looked at the British Empire, and they built this government off of all of that information. They didn't just make it up. They themselves were not the prophets. They were the sons, and then they became the fathers through their acts.
Well, that's a good point, that the whole sons and fathers and like where you come from, because I think one of the themes in the article is that, well, we didn't talk about our founding fathers at the beginning. We didn't talk about them until like, I think the 1950s is kind of when he starts. But I think like that's because
We didn't
they're
label
they're
them the
so out.
founding fathers, but they
Yeah,
were
but
talked about all the time.
that's also because like they were much fresher in our minds. Like you kind of, as people move out of our minds, we have to do more in order to remember them. So it would not make sense to really talk about the founding fathers in Abraham Lincoln's time, because they would have been still fresh in everyone's minds, and it was only a couple generations. And to me, it would make perfect sense that only 200 years after your country was founded, then you start have to sort of doing some more labels in order to help people remember. Like it's not a label that you can rally around, but it's, in this sense, it's a label that you can help use to teach. It's a teaching tool. So like, these are the founding fathers, these are what was important, because if you don't, like I said, if you don't, you learn from your father, but your father also has a responsibility to teach their son. And so that's in a way for the father to say, like, these are the things that are important to us, son, daughter, don't forget these as you go on to the rest of your life. Like, remember the founding fathers. It's that just a memory device that then sort of opens up everything, because it isn't as fresh in our minds. It isn't as clear as it was. It's people forget stuff. That's just humanity like that. So that's the key thing about like us having to teach the next generation. And so that, I think that's why that's a better argument for why you start seeing the word founding fathers more so in sort of quote modern history. Not because it was an effort to rally around this and to exclude people, but it was an effort in order to teach everyone, like, this is what's important. This is what the American ideal is, the key part of the American ideal in terms and understanding who we are and where we come from.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have a world without a past.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can. I just don't think it's a very successful world. It's like it'd be like a child like raising itself. Like what is they going to learn from? They're going to make all of those mistakes over again. Like I never burned my hand on the stove, right, as a kid, because I was taught that the stove is hot. Before I ever put my hand on it, I knew that stove was hot, and that I knew that because my parents taught me that, because somewhere along the line somebody put their hand on that stove. And like,
great grandpa Mayhew did it.
and but that's the advantage that's the advantage of having parents. That's the advantage of having a father, like is to be able to learn those lessons without making those mistakes. And I don't see a reason. Just the concept alone in the first paragraph of like, we don't need them. I don't comprehend. It's like I'll get to it later, but I'm reading the Fatal Conceit by Hayek, and basically in there at some point he's like, intellectuals get so smart they become dumb. I'll find the quote later, but and I say that a lot. I'm like, the smartest people are probably also some of the dumbest people. Like you get to a point where you rationalize everything and you kind of think that you know everything, but you forget why you know everything, right? Or and that's kind of the point Hayek is making, is like, yeah, people get to this point where they kind of want to create this new world order, not his words,
Yeah.
but in this way, and they forget that the reason that they are so smart is because of everything that has happened in the past. You can't just throw it away.
No, you can't. And it's a warning to us that we should not forget where we came from.
Absolutely. So in the news this week, besides this article, there was some, there's a lot going on, but in Congress, our friend George Santos, he's got a little scandal going on up there in New York. John, did you read about that?
not just a scandal. It sounds like it's a full on bunch of corruption. So if you're not familiar, George Santos is being investigated for campaign finance issues, and campaign finance is a issue that we'd like to talk about on this campaign. And some of the key findings that were released were he spent money on OnlyFans, he spent money on Sephora. So, like kind of improper use of campaign funds. So like, that's not good. If someone donates money to your campaign, really it should be spent for the campaign. Now, maybe you could argue, well, the Sephora is for makeup for your, TV appearances and stuff. So maybe, but probably not
He
OnlyFans.
looks like he wears a lot of makeup, doesn't he?
I think they all kind of do. I'm being honest. But the other thing was this whole straw donor scheme that he had. So, it's really easy to start a company. You just file some paperwork. And so he had a couple of companies that he was sort of quote doing business under. And I think he so some of the rules are if you don't have enough business, you actually don't have to like document it anywhere. So I don't know if he'd actually documented them in any of his filings at some point, but as the committee, the ethics committee was looking over the bank statements for both these campaigns, like his consulting company would get a $250,000 check, and then pretty much the next day, most of it go to his campaign. So it was just kind of like, again, not necessarily in and of itself sketchy, because if you're trying to run for Congress, as Jeff, Jeff and I, we like to say, like, it takes a lot of money, or people think it takes a lot of money. And
it does.
If you're, again, like if this is your job and you get paid, like I would take some of that money and put in a congressional campaign if I knew it would help me. So like, I think that in and of itself is not the thing, but there's proof, or, records that show that the person who had the consulting agreement really thought it was a campaign contribution. And I think even at some point they thought it was going to be like it was one of those donations was like to his super PAC that was associated with him. So that's also sketchy, because the super PAC is not supposed to coordinate with the candidates. So if you're donating to the candidate so that it goes to the super PAC, like
we talked about that last week,
probably. So it's just kind of like, real run of the mill grift, really. Average grift. And
I think that's my biggest issue with the campaign finance laws is like, some people are like, I think that it's good. Like and look, of course, if you're in politics, of course you think it's good. It brings more money in. But the problem is the rules are set up in a way that encourages bad people to circumvent them, like to take advantage of them. It's very easy to do. There's very little transparency once you get into it, and you're inviting corruption, and it's not, again, like my ideas last week is like, I'm not trying to like throw all the money of politics away. I'm just trying to like bring it into the light. Like let people know what's really going on and who's paying for these things. Like, why should George Santos try to have to funnel the money from here to here to get the campaign donation? Let's just make that guy who really wants to pay for his campaign, which I believe I have to go back and read the articles again, but wasn't that guy from Miami, by the way?
Oh yeah, out of the district. Yeah.
So like completely out of the district, trying to influence something in New York, right? And again, big problem with the system. But let's let the people of New York know that George Santos is listening to a lawyer or whoever it was from Miami instead of them, because then he'll be less likely to be reelected. Because it doesn't, when you look up the campaign finance filings and you see like one name for like $250,000 from Miami, you're going to go, whoa. And then people can start asking him questions about that. But you can't find this stuff unless an investigation happens like this. Or,
well, no, because it would just under the charade that he's really wealthy and is very successful businessman, but it's not a successful business. He's a successful grifter,
yes,
where he's able to steer money into an account that he controls and then shift it to another account he controls. Like, there's no skill in that, and it's not good representation for that.
And those are the people that get in the office, because and you say that there's no skill in that, but in reality, there actually is a little bit of skill in that. You have to like set aside your morals to be able to do that. Like, and so like right off the bat, like if you want to compete, you got to know that everybody else in that system is cheating. So you're either going in at a disadvantage, or you're going in, knowing that you're, and I take that back. Not everybody in the system is cheating. That's a mistake. That's definitely not happening. But a lot, I'm sure a lot are. And
Hmm.
it's only we Eric Adams last week. Now George Santos, which I mean that was only inevitable. I'm sure there'll be more. There's campaign finance violations all the time. It's just whether we hear about them or not, and how big they are, and if
Right.
they get investigated thoroughly. But yeah, it's a big problem.
Well, and part of it too is, if you think about it, George Santos is not quote part of the establishment. He won a primary and didn't make a lot of friends in Congress, so people are kind of looking out to get him. And Eric Adams was a sort of, I think he was pretty much a political unknown, kind of weirdly won the primary, a very crowded field, was able to kind of build the right coalition, but definitely not sort of an establishment New York politician. So you can also say like, well, there's also the people who are running the grifts and who've got the support of people around them. So you could also say like it's all they're going after those who are not in the sort of the main orbit of any of the
Well,
groups.
and that brings up another idea or theory about it is like if you are outside of the establishment and like you get close to power and they're like,
Mhm.
hey, you know what, everybody does this, you can do this thing, and they tell you to do it. Because I feel like we got advice that maybe, you know it, when you're getting advice it's like talk to money. I feel like that's bad advice. And I can imagine people in the system being like, yeah, everybody does this. George, dude, just have them write the check to your consultant firm and then write the check from your consultant firm to the PAC or whatever it was. Um, I feel like, that is legitimate advice that can come from a local official or whatever. And if you're outside of the realm, you may not know. And if you're naive or just lazy and you don't bother to like research it to find out, and you just trust this person, now you've committed a crime,
Mhm.
and now they have something to like hold over your head and make you
Yeah.
do stuff with, like, and I think Santos wasn't wanted from day one. I don't feel like the Republican establishment, the extreme wings of the Republican Party, nobody really wanted him there. He was just a guy who managed the grift. He saw the grift and he's like, I'm going to grift the
Mhm.
grifters. And
Yeah.
he managed to get himself some power, but at the end of the day, he's doesn't have enough power to stay there. And they're going to clearly they found out.
Well, yeah, and he's not running for election now because of this, and I think there's probably going to be some effort to get rid of him too.
They have to get rid of him. Like, I mean, I can't
Yeah.
believe he's still in Congress.
Well, these
You know,
things take time. These things take
yeah.
time. No, like I mean, like again, like I know a person who was running for Congress like a decade and a half ago. He had a very successful company, and he had mentioned to me as I was running, he's like, oh yeah, I would basically take money from my company because it was mine. It would in a one account, and I would then put it in my campaign because I could, and like that's totally licit. That's permissible because it's your own funds at the end of the day because you're the owner of a company, and those general funds are technically yours, and then you can move them to yourself as a payout, pay the taxes or whatever, do that legally, and then it's available for your campaign. So like again, like that's the mechanism that's real. And then the bad advice is like, well, instead of it being a legitimate business, it's just sort of a consulting company. And I was like reading the contract or something, it was like a business contract to like potentially bring in more business for this person. So like so vague and nondescript, and like the article's like, we don't know if he even did that. And then some of the other advice I got was like, I had a person helping me, and he's like, okay, so what you got to do is there some like family member you trust? And I was like, I think I got to have someone. And he's like, okay, so what you got to do is you got to get that person, don't talk to them after this, but you get them to start a super PAC for you, and then you fundraise in the super PAC. And at this point, like I was having trouble raising money from my campaign, just like regularly. So I didn't know any rich people that could fund a super PAC. But like that was the advice I got, was to like basically find some family member that I could that I trusted that could run this, but I wouldn't talk to them anymore because it would be collusion between a PAC and myself. But to try to do that and then fundraise into that, and then they could pay for stuff. And he's like, oh yeah, so like at some point we'll get a campaign bus, and the super PAC can pay for that. And I was like, how is that not the super PAC actually campaigning with me? Because Like, am I just gonna walk up one day and a bus appears in my driveway, and then I sort of like step into the bus and it just sort of drives on its own, and then I get out where it like, it doesn't make any sense. But that's the kind of advice you get, especially from people who aren't as experienced. I hate to say it, like really don't have the skin in the game, other than like making sure the checks get cashed to them. Like they give you stupid ideas and stupid advice that could lead you into making bad decisions down the road. So yeah,
I
you
mean,
know,
I told you the first thing I was told after it wasn't my time was that I needed to start a PAC. Like, and it's like, because I was supposed to start the PAC before I was running the Congress and establish the PAC and then run for Congress later. And then that PAC would then fund me. And it's like, where's the disconnection of coordination between the PACs if I'm literally, I mean, everybody we have in Virginia, it's the spirit of Virginia PAC. It's the Youngkin PAC, right?
mhm.
Like it's so obvious. Um,
But
and
his name's on the ballot, so he can do that. Like he's, and Virginia has their own weird campaign
yes,
laws.
yes. But I mean, and that's a different story. But again, it's sketchy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just sketchy. Um,
At the very least. So speaking of spirit of Virginia, and Glenn Youngkin was thinking of running for president until the election. Have you been following the presidential election, or are practicing what you preach and focusing on more important things?
um, the second one.
Okay. And what are those more important things, Jeff, that people should be focused on?
I mean, you have to be focused on Congress. Like if you're a citizen of the United States and you're a voter, your responsibility is to the House. Like that is your number one focus. Yes, you have a vote in the presidency, and yes, it is important.
Mm-hmm.
But it is like I just feel like it consumes the nation everywhere,
Yeah.
all over the place. And it sucks all of the air out of the room. And in reality, it's less important. It just is. Like that president, and we talked about it last week, he's to deal with the elites, the upper echelon of society, the Elon Musk, the Steve Jobs, or I guess Steve, not Steve Jobs. My apologies, Steve.
The ghost of
Uh,
Steve
the
Jobs.
ghost of Steve Jobs. Tim Cook,
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg, whoever, the people that have money. Um, but the House is for the people, and
Mm-hmm.
it is the closest that you're going to get to your federal power. And if you are worried about your federal government, which let's face it, we are, that's where you should be focused. You should be, trying to find somebody that A, understands what Congress's responsibilities are, B, like listens to the district that they live in, but C, and most importantly, doesn't just cater to the whims of the
Yeah.
citizens, right? Like somebody that, like, if they know their job and they're confident in what their responsibilities are, yes, they listen to the citizens, but they speak back to them and they go, hey, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe Congress should stand up to the executive branch. Maybe we should break through the whole Republican Democrat thing and forget about fighting amongst ourselves and actually fight back against the executive, because the executive has grown far too large and far too powerful, and we need to curtail that, and Congress needs to step up and you know let's also spread that a little bit further and say the court as well, the Supreme Court, both the executive and the Supreme Court have too much power, and it's a lot because Congress hasn't been doing their job. And why has the Congress not been doing their job? Because citizens haven't been doing their job. We haven't been focused on Congress. We've been focused on the presidency. Every 4 years, we are just zoomed, and it's not even every 4 years. It's like literally every year. The moment that the election finishes, we're already talking about the next president. But we never seem to be talking about our local representatives. And there's a varying factors for that. The disappearing local news would be part of
Mm-hmm.
that. But I just think at the end of the day, citizens are busy and they're tired, and it's just easier to vote for one person.
That's
So
right.
like, yeah.
It's a
And
3-year beauty contest.
so my thing is, if you only want to vote for one person, make sure it's your congressional rep. Abstain from the presidential race, and the next thing, if you're a citizen, you want to take your rights, and make sure that you're focused in the right place, is only vote for people that you voted for in the primary, or only vote in a general election if you voted in the primary election. Let's put it that way. Because if you didn't vote for the primary election, you're not voting your power. You're not voting your voice. You're voting somebody else's voice and somebody else's power. And how do you know that that's what you really wanted if you didn't pay attention during primary season? I think in our district, it was about 16,000 people voted in the primary.
Yeah.
And 400,000 people voted in the general. Think about that. 16,000 people decided who the 400,000 people got to vote for. And the 400,000 people that voted, how do they even know that that person represents them, or that there weren't better candidates to represent them?
Well, they don't, because they're not plugged in the system. I mean, like, that's, you talk about people being busy, like that is certainly part of the problem, and it's much easier to just pay attention to the one contest to rule them all, because that's what the national media is talking about. And you're not getting the same kind of flavor at the local. I would bet most people probably don't know who the representative is, other than just because
you should not be voting. Like, at the end of the day, like, and look, I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but let's look at the world that we live in, and let's all acknowledge that we all complain about Congress. We all complain about the president. We all complain that things aren't going well. Who has the power in this country? It's the voters. And we're just not doing a good enough job at the end of the day. We're not voting in the right people. The people that they're going to the ballot box and they're just being shuttled there, and then dropped off, and they're picking red or blue. And it's not working. Like, we've got to stop doing it and do something different. And I think the thing that we have to do different is, I was talking about this the other day. There's positive power and there's negative power. And when you are voting for somebody in a general election just because you don't like the other guy, you're giving that other person positive power. They're taking your vote as positive. They're taking your vote as a mandate that the people want them to do their thing.
Yep.
But that's not really the case, is it? Because you didn't really vote for that person. You actually voted against somebody else. So if you're going to the ballot box and you're only voting against somebody, my suggestion to you is use your negative power. Don't vote. And I know people will be like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Look, somebody's got to start. Like, there are two types of power, positive and negative. This positive power isn't working because it's misleading the people in office, and they're using your power against you. They're taking it and they're saying, you voted for me, so you want me to do all these things. And you're back here going, no, I voted against that person. I really don't want you to do anything. You're just a placeholder till the next election. But they don't see it that way. The only way to get them to see it that way is to not vote.
And it doesn't have to be not showing up to the polls. It could be literally casting a blank ballot, like, and I think if anything, that'd be more powerful, where you have someone who doesn't get a vote, because it shows like there's some kind of that's more of a negative than sort of positively voting against someone.
Yeah. Well, and I did that when I voted in our local elections. I voted for 2 people and I left the rest of them blank, because I didn't think anybody in those elections deserved to be voted for. And I wasn't going to vote. I'm not voting against people, plain and simple. I will vote for somebody. And if you don't put somebody on my ballot to vote for, then I'm not voting. And that's what every single disenfranchised voter should be calling their local parties. Like, that's the number one thing you can do, is if you are in Prince William County, find your email for Democratic Party or the Republican Party and go, look, if you don't start putting somebody on the ballot that I can vote for, I'm not voting anymore. Stop emailing me, stop texting me, stop asking me for money until you do your job of putting quality people on the ballot that actually know what they're doing instead of grifters trying to make money. Then I'm out. I'm done, And then, sure, you know what? Maybe you lose the election. Maybe the other guy wins, but they win with a lot less votes. And you know what you have now? Like, let's throw out a theory here. Our election, District 10, 400,000 or so people voted. I think it was like 800, almost 800,000 in the district. So let's say that half of the people take my advice, and now you only have 200,000 people that voted for that election, and half of those people voted 51% voted for the Democrat, and the Democrat wins office. But they won office with only like a 10% of their district voting for them. They cannot get to office and go, well, they wanted this. The
Right.
president can't get up there and go, well, the people voted Congress red or blue to match me, so I can do this. And you can look at the numbers and you go, no, they didn't. They did not vote for this. Look at the numbers. The numbers are against you. You barely got somebody in because there was no other viable option.
Yeah. No, it's powerful, and I think it's I think it's good to give people that option. I think people just assume that when you go to the ballot box, you got to put a checkbox next to everything. But I think no, you definitely don't have to. So, have you what have you been reading this past week as your ample free time?
I've been reading a lot. So I've been here. I don't know if I can get it on here. I got my these are Jefferson and Madison letters. So I've been reading those back and forth. So Julia went on to Founders Online for me and printed them all out.
Oh, nice.
There's like 1,000 of them. We're like halfway through. And then just a little light studying here. This is Dodge versus Ford, Virginia State Board Pharmacy versus Virginia Citizens Council, Buckley v. Vallejo, McConnell v. FPC, and Citizens United. Just brushing up,
Light reading, right there.
And then the book is The Fatal Conceit by Hayek. And so this is a fantastic book, by the way. You'll have to read it.
I've read The Road to Serfdom. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I read that last year, the year before. That is very good. Let me read you this quote here. To the naive mind that can conceive of order only as the product of deliberate arrangement, it may seem absurd that in complex conditions, order and adaptation to the unknown can be achieved more effectively by decentralizing decisions, and that a division of authority will actually extend the possibility of overall order. Yet that decentralization actually leads to more information being taken into account. Boom. What do you think that means?
It's many hands make light work. I mean, it's basically just saying that if you, instead of having to put the burden of decision making on one single point, if you actually spread it out, you get more people being able to take in more information and then distilling that and then sort of bubbling up the key things so that the better decisions get made overall. So to me, that's a strong argument in favor of smaller Republican government.
Uncap the House. That's what that says right there. That says by expanding the House, bringing more people, more of the citizenry into the House, you're going to have more information in the House. That's what we talk about too. We've talked about on the show before is the people in Congress don't know the detailed information they need to know about all the industries that they oversee, right? And that's because there's only 435 of them. Right. There's so much in the world of 330 million citizens that how could 435 people really know all that information? And the only way to get to know more is to bring more people into the body, to decentralize it. You bring more information into account.
Hayek, and like half of them are lawyers too, and like what do lawyers know other than FEC versus McConnell?
Well, but that's exactly it, right? Why are half of them lawyers? Because you need to be a lawyer to circumvent the campaign finance laws or to follow them and to like get into the system. You don't need those techie guys.
Well, tech's taking over everything, so at some point it'll just be a bunch of Chat GPT operators that are able to run this country.
That's you know what? I think that's what Congress really wants. They were like, you know what? We don't even need us here anymore. Let's just leave the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, and then everything else will just be a chat GPT bot. Like we'll just centralize power as much as possible.
But you send in a constituent email and you just get a chat GPT response like, "You Jeff, yes, expand the house. Here's 10 reasons why it won't work. And here's 10 reasons why it could work. We'll consider this. Thank you."
Yeah. So I have a question for you. There was something going around on Twitter, like right before I came on, that I kind of jumped in on. I thought it was interesting, and I'm gonna just kind of throw this at you last minute. Let me find it real quick so I can make sure I get the question right. So our friends Scott Howard and Tyler Sick, they were doing these. It's 4 books that had a major influence on your political thought. So John, could you tell me, do you, just off the top of your head, could you
I got
name
some
4?
books.
Yeah, what are the 4 books that had your political thought?
I mean, obviously many books, so I'm gonna miss them. So I've been thinking about this actually since we had Scott Howard on and he was talking about books. So I failed to mention Witness by Whitaker Chambers. That was a key book for me. On Duties by Cicero. That was a key book for me. Now I can't think of can't put me on the spot like this. I gotta get my prep, my notes. Yeah, I'm really bad at being on the spot. Why don't you give me your 4 and then I'll see if I can.
It's my 4. They're right back here. Hold on. All right.
Oh, I've got it. I mean, like, okay, so then the other, I'd say they're not really 4 books, but like key for me was just reading American history, like from cover to cover. So the
So this is
Oxford American
political theory, like your political
I know,
thought.
but I think like you need the foundation in order to understand the theory.
Yeah, I agree.
So let me see, was my Audible?
All right, so mine, I've of course the Federalist Papers. The Disquisition on Government by John C. Calhoun. The Spirit of Laws by Montesquieu.
It's esoteric right there.
And the Bible.
I like that. It's a good list. As I'm rolling through my Audible list right here, another book that actually kind of off the wall, but it's helped me think about things is The Allure of Battle. That's one I love to recommend to people. And that's one where it's just sort of talking about how people get caught up in thinking that a battle is the key, it's going to change everything, but really there's much more to war, and so much of modern warfare is just big attrition, big battles of attrition. And I think maybe that's what we have to get rid of. We have to get rid of the history that says like all you need is a decisive battle, because that's so many people die because we get stuck in big wars where there's never ending. I mean, like, that's that's World War I in a nutshell. Like, that was just like, got to get the decisive breakthrough at this point, and you never got it, and you just kept throwing people in the meat grinder.
Yeah.
So I have to think about what a 4th one might be. I'm really embarrassed that I can't just like list them off like that.
I had so many books I wanted to throw out. Yeah. So Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations and Theory of Moral Sentiments, which I kind of like. I think you have to read both of those together, in my opinion. Hayek, The Road to Serfdom. I really like that. I think that's fantastic. David Hume, The History of England. I mean, come on. Not that I've actually read all of that. It's on my
actually,
list.
was it like the another sort of thing out there that's not necessarily political theory on the surface, but is very political, was it's the Richard ad or Henry ad, the 3 Richard the 1, Richard 2, Richard 3 Shakespeare plays. Like,
yeah,
that's like dictatorship and power. And I remember reading this, and I think it was around 2016, and all I could think of was like, this kind of sounds a lot like Hillary Clinton.
Yeah,
just, but like, like pure power and sort of a willingness to just trample over everything and to stay in power. So those are good political theory books. Yeah, it's gonna,
Yeah, I'm just looking at my books now, just trying to figure out.
see, this is why you do prep. No audibles on the show.
No audibles, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people on the had Kirk, which I have the Conservative Mind by Kirk. I have that too, but I didn't have that as high on my list. Not
You got
that
so many other great books in there.
I
That's
mean, I don't know, like I feel like a lot of the books are like people's take on politics. But like
yeah.
my books are actually the people that were making like they were written by actual people in the government. I mean, not the Bible and not Montesquieu, but Madison, Hamilton,
Hmm.
Jay, Calhoun, they
Hmm.
actually like were part of the governing body at some point. And then, the Federalist Papers themselves are unique in the fact that that is kind of the shaping of it. I almost might throw like the notes from the Federal Convention in there. That definitely has had I mean, that has
Like, and
shaped my
that's
political thought a lot because that is literally like what Congress is this deliberative body of like,
mhm.
going back and forth and trying to like, you know, just talk through the problems until we find an answer so we don't fight about them. And that's what the system is, guys. Talk through the
Yeah.
problems until we find an answer so we don't fight about it and we just don't do it anymore.
No, it's tough. I mean, I think things are so polarized that it requires a certain level of disarm, like self disarmament, in order to come into that kind of conversation. And if the other, the person you're trying to debate or dialogue with doesn't want to do that, like, that's part of the impasse too, is because you make yourself more vulnerable, and then they take up their stilettos and they get you where get you where it hurts. So like, it's it's going to be tough to it is tough to do this because um both sides have to be willing to sort of retread ideas that they have held closely, and maybe give up something in it. And I think most people don't want to give up anything.
No, they don't. That's kind of the problem too. I mean, we always just like the system is designed for us to work towards our personal interests.
Hmm.
But starting around the 14th Amendment, you know, and the courts afterwards, the personal interest kind of got lost. The individual got lost, and then it became about the group. But, and you may
Well,
think,
no, it always is about the group, though. There's always it's trying to balance the individual interest versus the group. And I think your
well,
point is that the group became more important than the
the
individual.
group became more important to the individual, and so specifically with the 14th Amendment, and I mentioned earlier with the Lochner era and in the court is this idea of corporation rights, this idea that the corporation had some sort of stake in whatever.
Hmm.
Um, it kind of just it started around that time, and people got lost. It
Yeah.
became there's a book, right? It's right here. See, We the Corporations. It was We the People, and then it became We the Corporations after the 14th Amendment, which
Yeah.
is classic people using their personal interests to manipulate government, right? Because the 14th Amendment was not written with the intent of creating a bigger corporate class. It was
No.
written for what, John? What was the 14th Amendment written for?
Something about this slavery problem the United States had, and trying to fix all those.
How do you like it, how do you go from, you know, freeing this, uh as who was it? Grant, he called them the free people, you
Hmm.
know, you go from that to like, well, corporations,
To be able to donate
they should be able to
unlimited amounts
donate
of money.
money. They should, they have rights. They have things to say. And it's like they do. The people inside the corporations absolutely have things to say. And they have rights in this country to say them. They don't need more rights to say them. You know?
They're doing just fine with what they got. Well, that's also like, you could say there's a perverse way to argue it, where, well, the corporation hires people, so if we're doing something good for the corporation, we're doing good for the workers of the corporation. So that's like the trickle down almost, if you will, of rights, where we give the corporation rights and that effectively gives people rights. But in reality, it's not the case, because most workers don't control what the corporation does. They just sort of follow along with whatever the dictates from the top are.
Yeah, we talked about that last week, because if the people that are actually creating the power for the corporation have no say in the decision making of the corporation, but the corporation is using that money that is generated by those people to hire or pay representatives, essentially through campaign finance,
Mm-hmm.
to be in office and then legislate for them, not the people that are in the corporation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, I got something real quick before we leave. So I'm reading the Bible, and
Mm-hmm.
I was reading through Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's the story of Jesus. It's the New Testament. And I was curious, because I'm not all the way through yet. Is there a point where they talk about Jesus's childhood?
No, that's the hidden years, right? That's like the part where there's sort of like the presentation of the temple, the finding of the temple.
See,
Um,
that's what I thought
but that's
too.
kind of it.
But so then this is my why I was thinking this is because you meet Jesus when he's born, and then the next time you kind of see Jesus, he's Jesus. Like he's the Jesus, he's God's son, and he's performing all these miracles. And I just wonder, like, what was Jesus like in between those time frame? Because his life must have been hard. I bet his
Mhm.
parents were not fantastic, because his mother was a virgin before having him. He doesn't really have his father. Okay. His father is in heaven. So the guy raising him is not his biological father. I bet that was difficult for both Jesus and Joseph, you
Well,
know?
there's a lot of literature on that. I mean, like, and they sort of the Catholic tradition, like Joseph accepts the responsibility of being Jesus' father, and raises him as a son, and Jesus, being perfect God, can be the perfect child. So I don't think there's actually a lot of pain in there. I think it's actually, there's sort of the tradition in the Catholic Church that it's a lot of joy
Oh,
and
yeah.
peace. I mean, like poverty, obviously, because you're just a carpenter, sort of a craftsman. Like I think almost like a handyman is what I've been led to understand. Like just sort of doing whatever jobs you can to support your family, and like doing them well. But I think like there was sort of a you got to think of like you got God, so that's perfect. The tradition is that like Mary had no blemishes, and then I think in that situation like Joseph would have a lot to live up to and would try to do it. So like at least in the Catholic faith, we sort of think of it as like actually a lot of peace and happiness as they sort of go through there. But it's I think it's got to be tough. I think there's the bit at the presentation where Anna, the prophetess, says a sword will pierce your heart to Mary, and she doesn't quite understand it, and she's like ponder it. I imagine the speaking of like what's the one event in Jesus' childhood that we have? It's where he ditches his parents to go hang out at the temple. Like, you know, there's some kind of uncertainty, and for obviously God knows what he's doing, so there's that. But the parents are kind of blindsided by that from what we read, and so they don't actually know, and they have to kind of trust the system, or sort of so like yeah, there's um some kind of conflict there in terms of like God's ultimate plan and then using humans in order to have that plan come to fruition. But I think it doesn't have to be sort of an antagonist thing. I think if anything, because you are God, you're able to smooth over any differences and things. So I think that's why the Catholic Church has kind of the more tradition of it was peaceful, happy,
But
and sort of a loving environment.
when does Jesus know that he's God? Like, when does he
I
know that
think
he's
I think
God?
always, because
He always knows
that's
this?
I think so, yeah.
I don't know. I haven't figured that
Yeah.
out yet. I'm still kind of reading through. Uh, we're still
No,
learning. We're
speaking
always
speaking of
learning.
going back to the founding, like I read the Bible myself like 3 years ago, which is like it was like a daily podcast, and that was the first time I'd ever gone like cover to cover, and there was definitely parts that I had never heard before. So like it is good to go
I
back to the beginning
I have been
in the
reading
beginning.
it. I've been reading it cover to cover, and I gotta say there was a lot of stuff in there I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot. I didn't even know there was like there's some books of the Bible that I had just never heard of. Like you
Yeah.
never hear quoted. Like
Hmm.
you always hear Matthew and Luke quoted, right? You hear Genesis, you hear Exodus, but how often do you hear Ruth?
Very rarely. Yeah. Well, it's in the mass. Every once in a while they throw it in the mass. So
Yeah, I was
it's but no, like I mean, like that's part of the problem. Like it is such a big book, and to read it in a whole year means you got to take like 15-20 minutes a day to do that. So obviously that's a big tall order, especially in this modern age where people are so busy. So I think more people read the Bible back when they had less things to do, but it's easy to get distracted now.
Ah, that yeah, you know what? I'm adding that to my citizen list. All right. So if you want to be a good citizen, um, only vote in primary elections and only vote
Mm-hmm.
in a general election if you vote in a primary election. Focus on Congress, study the people running for office, make sure you meet them, and then read the Bible. Or,
It's a
hey,
key.
look, if
No,
if
but
it's
it's like it's
if
a
it's
key
not your
text.
religion, read something,
Hmm.
whatever. I just I I've learned a lot from it, and it's it's really interesting story. And
Hmm.
I'm still like, I understand where you're coming from with the childhood thing there, but everything that the Bible has taught me is how flawed man is.
Yes.
And yes, Jesus is the son of God, but Joseph isn't. And I just imagine there were some problems at some point.
I'm
I
not
gotta
denying that.
imagine,
Yeah.
and I would just wonder how does the son of God handle that as like an 8-year-old? Like
Well, so like if you think about it, it's usually not the initial problem that causes friction in a family.
yes,
It's the response to it. So you got to
absolutely.
think like, so say someone makes a mistake, what's Jesus's response is going to be perfect. So that would help. That would help smooth it over. And I think that's
Well, but see, the thing is like Jesus doesn't have to make a mistake for Joseph to lash out at Jesus.
no, that would be the mistake then. But then again, like, what's the response to lashing out? It's perhaps docility or something. You're saying like, yes, Father, you're right, or
Yeah.
Father, you know, let's think of again, like we can't necessarily think of the perfect response because we're just people, but like you got to imagine again, like you can't put human limitations on God in that respect. So I think
I'm not. I'm more focused on Joseph here.
no,
I'm.
but again, like it's in any relationship, it's always how someone responds to someone else, and I think that's where the peace and the
I don't know. I want a book on that. I mean, we
Mhm.
can't go back in time and get it. It's too late now. But that would be because that's one of my favorite parts about reading biographies is
Mhm.
like I want, it's great. I love what all these people did in their adult years, but what really makes them capable of doing all these things is what happened in that first 20
Right.
years.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely, that was the first place that my mind went today when I was, like I said, I read through Mark and part of Luke, and I was just thinking, I'm like, I wonder what happened to Jesus when he was a
Who is
kid.
this Jesus guy? Where does he come from?
Yeah, like I mean, the uh yeah, that's just where my mind went. I don't know, maybe I'm
No,
crazy.
no, it's good. I mean, it's always good to think about that and help understand it more because it is more than just what's on the pages. Like it is the story around it and the context and like so I got to go to Israel a couple years ago and like to obviously you get to walk through some of the areas that Jesus walked and like it brings things to life even though sort of the he's always just sort of like walking from this town to this town and you like go to that town and then you go to this other town you can sort of imagine him walking through that like it isn't necessarily technically on the pages but like there's more life to it so I think it is good to think about like what's the context for any of these situations and where we are.
Yeah. Well, it was a good show, John. What do you think?
Good show.
So Thanksgiving coming up this week. John, can we take we're gonna take next week off, right, John? Because it's gonna be next Sunday. We'll take next Sunday off because I know I'm going to be tired after Thursday and Friday. Do you do any Black Friday shopping?
No, but I'm actually gonna. I was gonna make a joke because I'm gonna do Black Friday shooting, but it's gonna be Wednesday, so I'm gonna go skeet shooting with my brother.
Yeah. So we'll be off next week, and we'll be back. We still have a week after Thanksgiving this week. We'll still have a week of November afterwards, because Thanksgiving was like a little bit earlier this year than normal. So still got one more show for November, and then we'll be into December, rolling down into the year, back
End
into
of the
the
year.
2024 elections. Oh man, where are we going?
Oh man.
um, so anything for the people before we leave out of here?
Just wishing everyone a happy Thanksgiving, and again, I'm thankful for all our listeners and everyone who's tagged along with us throughout this journey.
Absolutely. And I'm thankful for you and being here with me
Oh,
most Sundays. And, you know,
that's right. I'm sorry, Jeff. I take you for granted too much. I am thankful for you. I'm good.
and the rest of our
But that's
Madisonian
hey,
team.
that's what Thanksgiving's about. It's realizing our blessings and being like, oh yeah, I should be thankful for Jeff Mayhew and all the joy he brings.
I'm thankful for you and the Madisonian team and my family and all the listeners out there and readers, and the fact that I was able to get published. Some crazy person decided to publish me a few times this year.
That's
I'm
awesome.
thankful for that, and just lots of good things, and looking forward to some good turkey dinners and some blessings and seeing family over the weekend. So yeah.
There it is.
All right. Well, remember to like, share, subscribe, and as always, peace and love.